in that probably 2 or 3 years ago now as an experiment, we ran 6 days straight of lectures at the Barramara Yacht Club, and it was enormously successful, and over 1,000 people attended. So we're pretty proud of that effort, and it encouraged us to continue with attempting science education, particularly in Victoria. And in this case, of course, we're doing it via Zoom. So we've got a track record and we want to build on it. And at this stage, and without further ado, I'd like to pass over to Claire for a welcome to country from our local Bunurong people. Claire?
Thanks, Ray. Hi, everyone. I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm meeting with you on the lands of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and that MESAC acknowledges the Bunurong people as the traditional custodians of the lands and waters around Bayside. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and we pledge to care for and protect the delicate and diverse life inhabiting this sacred place. Thank you.
Beautiful, thank you, Claire. I'll just mute everyone and then I'll unmute myself and Shannon so we can speak. Shannon. Yeah, I'm just unmuting Shannon, darling. Oh no, can you hear me, Shannon?
I unmuted myself.
Oh, good. Okay, perfect. Okay. So I'd like to introduce Shannon Hurley. For most of her life, Shannon has been a passionate advocate for the marine world. An avid scuba diver and underwater photographer, she's travelled the world as a scuba diving instructor and immersed herself in the oceans in places such as the Galapagos, South Africa, and across Australia. Graduating with a bachelor degree in animal and veterinary biosciences, Shannon has dedicated more than 10 years of her life to roles in marine education, campaigning, management, and planning across the NGO and government sectors. These have involved rescuing entangled birds and beach dolphins in her role as Marine Ranger, and she constantly campaigns to protect our Great Barrier Reef. One day, her biggest love in life, scuba diving, turned into her worst nightmare, where she was suddenly filled with fear and anxiety. Sharks are her biggest teachers in life and helped to transform her fear and anxiety into freedom. And so birthed her mission to help others learn from and connect with sharks. As a result, she teaches people how to give a fish through connecting and educating on the importance of sharks and our oceans, empowering people to take simple actions in our everyday lives that make a difference to the environmental crisis we're seeing unfold. She shares her passion with others through public speaking, online communications, and leading immersive ocean expeditions. She's fortunate enough to work as a nature conservation campaigner with a focus on marine and coastal conservation at the leading organisation, Victoria National Parks Association. She's exuberant, she's passionate, and she loves what she does. Welcome, Shannon.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Virginia, Ray, and Claire for having me. And thanks, Claire, for the acknowledgement of country as well. I too wanted to pay my respects to the traditional owners and who have used this land and sea for thousands of years. And thank you all for joining us here on this Sunday morning. I really want to make this talk as interactive as possible. And so even though we're all on the Zoom screen, tuning in from our different parts of Victoria or even further afield, I would love to make it feel like we are in this room together. So to do that, I wanted to invite everyone, if you feel comfortable, to put on your video cameras, if you feel comfortable. That just helps to create a sense that we're all in this same room together. And also, as much as it is tempting to multitask, for the next 30 minutes, I would love just to have your attention, just to make sure that I can deliver as much value to you as possible. So maybe just chuck your phone over on the other side of the room or wherever you are, if that is possible for you. So I am going to share my screen with you all. Now, can everyone see this? Oops. Okay, good. So far, so good. Okay. So I wanted to take everyone on a journey this morning from fear to giving a fish, with sharks as our teachers. And I just want to learn a bit about you all before we get into it. So let's be honest, who here has a fear of sharks in whatever form that fear could take? I just want you to pop up your hands if you have your videos on, just so I can see. Oh, I can see a couple of people, yeah, and some people not. Well, if you were one of the people who put up your hands, you're definitely not alone. You're about one of 72% of Australians who do have a fear of sharks. And this was shown from some recent polling the Sydney Sea Life Aquarium did. And when they also looked at what Australian state or territory had the most fear of sharks, guess what the result was? Victoria. So I think we definitely still have a lot of work to do here. But what if I told you that your fear of sharks, or any fears of your life, could be transformed into your freedom? Well, this is exactly what happened to me. And I've had a lot of fun chasing sharks in different parts of the world, and they have been some of my greatest teachers in life, teaching me, one, the importance of facing our fears. And I'm so glad I did that, which you will hear very shortly, because it happened to be one of the most life-changing moments of my life, which has led me to be here talking in front of you all today, to be a voice for sharks, to, you know, really value, respect, and then protect them. And particularly during the time when I think that there's so much fear in the world now, given this COVID pandemic. I've learned a thing or two along the way about facing fear, and I really wanted to share with you some of those tools, my 3 pearls of wisdom, as I'm calling them, with you today, that I hope will help transform fear in any situation, whether this is with sharks or not. And for me, it's really been the solace of the natural world. And for me particularly, it's actually been a lot of the time for sharks. And because sharks have taught me so much in my journey swimming with them, I've also become really passionate about teaching people how to give a fish, about what we can all do in our daily lives to really make an impact for sharks, for our oceans and the planet, making us feel empowered with simple things that we can do in our everyday lives to make a difference. So definitely look out for that in the talk as we go along. And as Virginia said, please pop in any questions that you might have in the chat box as we go along. Okay, so when a lot of people hear the word shark, this is the typical image that they would think of, right, or visualize. It's the great white with the jaws agape, massive teeth, the eyes rolled back in their head. And it's no surprise, right? Because, you know, the role that the media has played, and movies such as Jaws, in bringing out this fear in sharks. Some people I know from hearing the word shark immediately get the sweaty palms and the tight muscles and automatically feel that fear. And for me, it wasn't until my first real life interactions with sharks that actually flipped how I saw sharks in a totally new light. And that one of those first experiences happened to be on the Great Barrier Reef from this beautiful boat. And one particular night, we were standing on the back of our boat when we look up and we see swimming straight for our boat what I have named Princess, Pookie and Paul, what I like to call the puppy dogs of the sea, otherwise known as nurse sharks. And they were amazingly swimming in this conga line straight for our boat. And then they looked to be playing on the surface of the water, like chasing each other. And then they came to the back of the boat, and as if they were like little children teething, like sucking onto the back of the boat. And they were looking up at us with their tiny, cute little button eyes, never mind all of their rows of teeth. But for me, this this experience was the first time that I saw a different side to sharks. I saw that some sharks could be cute, cuddly and playful. And for me, this was really what changed and developed my curiosity about sharks even more. And I learned that there's something more to these creatures than what the media, the only story that the media seems to be telling us. And we've all been there, right? We've judged someone and then we've actually had that flipped on us and then thought, oh, actually that person is really not what I thought they would be. Well, this is the kind of experience what it was like for sharks for me. And so I began to get really curious and I wanted to know more and swim with them and find out more about sharks. But then my next experience, when I was working as a scuba diving instructor in Fiji, they have the famous shark feeding dive. And this particular experience showed me that not all sharks could be cute and cuddly and playful, just like these tawny nurses were. And this here is a video of one of those experiences. So you will probably not hear sound, but hopefully you can see the visual. So this dive, we were 16 meters below the surface and we were admiring this huge ball of fish just in front of us. And there were sharks swimming everywhere in amongst the fish. And then now all of a sudden comes Bruce, the massive bull shark. We had locked eyes and Bruce was swimming straight for me. I remember holding up this tiny little camera in front of me thinking, take my camera, just take it. And Bruce swims so close, as you can see, that our noses almost touched and then he just swims off. So you can imagine in that moment then how much my heart was beating and pounding. And that experience really reminded me that sometimes in life we are faced at our edges, right? Probably like a lot of us feeling right now during COVID, not being able to go do the things that we want to do. You know, stuff gets uncomfortable, life gets uncomfortable. And for me, since I've learned from this experience, is that there's something so powerful about being in situations that make us uncomfortable. And can you imagine in that experience if I was to bolt to the surface, and that would not have ended very well for me. So I had to just learn to be uncomfortable in the uncomfortableness. So I had a lot of fun swimming with sharks around the world and I just loved it. It was one of the things that makes me most happy in life is to explore the underwater world, which I'm sure a lot of you can concur with that. But one particular day, everything changed for me and my playtime was over. So I was working as a Great Barrier Reef campaigner in Brisbane and I used to love to go scuba diving on the weekends. And this one particular dive, me and my buddy were 26 meters below the surface and we're about to swim into this deep, dark cave. And there's something I wanted you to understand here is that for me, going into a deep, dark cave was not something I felt nervous about because I'd done some cave diving before and it felt really comfortable. But this one particular day was different. And as me and my buddy were swimming into this cave, all of a sudden this wave of anxiety and fear literally riddled my body and my muscles went tight. My chest and throat felt like they were closing up. And all of a sudden I felt like I couldn't breathe. And this is an issue, being 26 meters below the surface when we're reliant on our scuba diving equipment to breathe. And it totally took me left of field. Nothing had ever happened like that before at all to me. And luckily, I'm okay because I made it to the surface and it was all fine because I'm still here telling you the story. But what suddenly dawned on me in the moment directly I got up out of the surface onto the boat was that the thing that I love to do most in this world, which is scuba diving and exploring our amazing underwater world, was basically I felt like it was ripped from underneath my feet because I wouldn't be able to do it anymore, feeling the fear and how much anxiety that it brought me. And I just Can you imagine if something that you love so much was actually just ripped from underneath your feet, like how that would feel? Well, that's how I felt in that moment. But I knew deep down that there was something calling me to face the fear. And that something happened to be hundreds of hammerhead sharks in the Galapagos Islands. And there was just something about this one particular experience I really wanted to have. And I thought, well, if there's going to be one dive I'm going to have left in my life, this was going to be it. And so I ended up saving my pennies, quitting my job, and got on a plane to travel to the Galapagos Islands. And I'm so glad I did, because this moment happened to be one of the most life-changing moments for me in my life. Because one, it taught me the importance of facing our fears and the magic that is on the other side of that. And two, it taught me that sharks can be symbols of all of our freedoms, teaching not only me, but everyone else the tools that we can use in our own daily lives to face fear, whether that is with sharks or other fears that we might have in our life. And so I wanted to take everyone on a journey, on a deep dive for what it was like to swim with these hundreds of hammerhead sharks. And just out of curiosity, has anyone ever swam with hammerheads? Please feel free to pop it in the chat or raise your hand if you have. I'm seeing a few no's. But even though this experience was from my point of view, I want to invite you all to have your own experience when you're down there. And if you don't have a fear of sharks, maybe you want to try and face some other fears that you're facing in your life right now. Whether it be the fear of going on public transport at the moment, or the fear of, when are we going to get out of lockdown or go on our next holiday or weekend away. And just really concentrate on whatever the fear is for you, because I'm going to be talking you through a bit of a strategy which helped me in that moment to deal with my own fears and anxiety. So is everyone ready to go on a deep dive with hammerhead sharks? Okay, so I want everyone to just close your eyes just for a couple of minutes. So just close your eyes, and we are on our little inflatable Zodiac, and we are about to descend down into the water. So we're doing a backwards roll entry. We plunge into the water and we swim down really, really fast because the current is quite strong. And eventually we find a rock wall on the bottom to cling onto, and waiting for these hammerheads to come out of the blue. Now, while we're waiting, I want everyone just to notice your thoughts that you might be feeling at the moment. Are you thinking, these sharks could come out and eat me? Or are you thinking that there's a new way of seeing sharks in this moment? And I want you to bring to your attention a current fear that's live for you at the moment in your life. This could be this particular dive now, swim with sharks, because sharks terrify you, or it could be something else that you're afraid of in your life at the moment, or that brings you some level of uncomfort. And just notice what it is and allow it to be there. Now, for me, this happened to be the fear of being down and scuba diving and wondering, is this anxiety going to come on into my body again? Am I going to be able to still breathe? And am I going to be able to keep my cool whilst 30 meters under the surface? And just want you to notice what you're feeling. Are you feeling, maybe you're just totally feeling excited to see these hammerheads, or maybe you're feeling nerves, anxious, a bit of fear of sharks or fear of something else. And I want you to befriend that fear that you're feeling, whatever it is, and say g'day to it. Give it a name. Allow it to be there. just like you would a friend having a cup of tea. And then I want you to be grateful for whatever the fear that you might be feeling in this moment is. Saying thanks for showing up in my life and asking it, what have you come to teach me? Because I do feel that, you know, fear has a really important part to play in our lives. And if we could start to develop a more positive relationship with it, that we can start to transform it into something that works for us. And just be grateful for the fear. And it's almost like I see that the fear is their messengers trying to tell us something in life. And next, whilst still focusing on that fear, maybe you're feeling, maybe it's bringing up some other thoughts or uncomfortable feelings in your body, and that's okay. But what I want everyone to do now is to focus on someone or some place that you love very much. So it could be a parent, a sibling, a friend, or a place. Maybe if you're a local to Ricketts Point Marine Sanctuary, maybe you just love this place so much. And I just want you to focus on the love that you have for that person or place and put that love and really feel that in your heart. And for me, that love happened to be these hammerhead sharks, because in that moment of feeling love, I was getting out of my head and the thoughts which were fueling my fears and anxiety in that moment, to focus on the love I had. And just take a deep breath in and out and just feel the silky ocean water giving you a big giant hug and slowly evaporating any fears that you might have in your life, slowly evaporating away. Another deep breath in and out. Now, this is the same feeling of this love that we are going to feel and that I felt in this moment when I opened my eyes to see these hammerhead sharks. And I want everyone to open your eyes now, because to our left, we see this giant 2.5 meter female hammerhead swimming straight for us. Her white underbelly is grazing the top of our heads. She's almost giving us a fancy new haircut. She's so close that we could basically just reach out and hug her. And then immediately just behind her is 1 through tens of hammerhead sharks, females in this amazing school that are just gliding into the current just a couple of meters in front of us. This is such an incredible experience. We have a grin from ear to ear, and we are feeling such love and awe for these beautiful prehistoric creatures, like the swimming dinosaurs of the seas, even older than the dinosaurs. Just to be in their presence is truly magical. And for those of you who might be imagining seeing these hammerheads at the moment, this, to give you a break from imagining, this is what is one of the shots that I was seeing. So for me, this experience was so powerful because in that moment of connecting to something or someone that I love, obviously this happened to be the hammerhead sharks, and just being grateful in that moment, I was able to get out of the thoughts and that were fueling that anxiety and fear. And in this moment, it all just disappeared. And swimming with these sharks actually helped me to see my own courage to transform these fears into my freedom, to freedom that I could scuba dive again and not let these fears rule my life. And so I am forever grateful to these hammerhead sharks for almost showing me what happens to be on the other side of facing those fears. And so there was a few steps I learned about facing fears in this experience and some other ones you know, after this moment. And so I just wanted to share almost what has become my little kind of formula for dealing with fear, and not just this situation, but other situations in life which have really worked for me. And it's what I'm calling the BFG, the big friendly giant. And almost how I think of this is like the whale shark. You know, they are the biggest fish in the sea, and they are the most beautiful, gentle giants. And so you may have noticed this little formula as we were going through that shark immersion. But I just wanted to recap here. So the B stands for befriending the fear. And so this is like trying to develop a more positive relationship with the fear in our life. So saying g'day to it, giving it a name, just anything that's really allowing and just accepting that it is there in your life. Because only when we really start to accept things, acknowledge things, then we can actually move past it, in my experiences anyway. And the G stands for gratitude, or being grateful for the fear. Like for me, that fear, that anxiety that was brought up now is actually, I'm so grateful that that came up for me, because it's actually led to me being a voice for sharks and like realizing what I want to do with my life. So I have never been more grateful for having such an experience. But I think that the moment that we acknowledge and maybe recognize that some of these fears sometimes come up in our life because they're almost messengers trying to tell us something, then we can really start to see, maybe look beyond that and think of why. And then the F stands for feel. So that little exercise that I did with focusing on someone or some place that you love very much automatically gets you out of your head and the thoughts that might be fueling any fears or any anxiety, and into your heart to think of someone or a place that you love very much, and it gets you into your heart. And in that moment you sort of realize that you can actually transform anything that you're having if you just keep coming back to that. And whilst the BFG might be a lot to remember in a particular moment of panic or anything, even if everyone could just take away one of those things, whether it's befriend or being grateful or, you know, feeling the love for something, I find that any one of those definitely does help any situation. So I hope that that is useful to use in any situations that you might come up in your life, particularly at these times when there is a lot of fear and anxiety in the world at the moment. So obviously I was incredibly grateful for this experience with hammerhead sharks. It helping me develop a much more closer relationship with myself. But for me, and as much as I was able to face this fear, a new fear happened to come up in my life of losing some of my greatest teachers in life, which was these sharks. And so this new fear, not long after returning home from my trip in the Galapagos Islands, I still remember this day so vividly. And something was about to devastate me. And I remember I remember finishing a really busy day at work and scrolling through my phone and coming up across an image that was about to be another turning point in my life. And this next image is quite a gory image. So if you don't like gore, maybe just please turn away now. But this was the image with the headline, up to 90% of hammerhead sharks fished from our Great Barrier Reef. And there was a beautiful hammerhead's face with a hook through its eye. And my eyes swelled with tears at the contrast of swimming with hundreds of hammerheads just earlier in the Galapagos and coming back to our home country in Australia, where now often we think this stuff just doesn't happen here, or, you know, parts of the world look to Australia as a leader in marine conservation, where we had almost wiped out this particular species of the scalloped hammerhead. And it was that moment that I knew I had to make a change, and I had to make a decision. And that decision happened to be a voice for sharks. to rebrand them as something, as species to be valued and protected. And so has birthed my mission of how to give a fish, which sharks along the way have taught me how to give a fish and what I can do in my daily lives to protect them. And so I've become really passionate about teaching others how to give a fish as well. And so this is the part of the journey where I'm going to be taking you on, to teach you about some of the learnings that I've had with sharks and how we can all really make a difference. So to give you some context for sharks in Australia and how important they are in our waters, it's really important to compare this with globally how many species of sharks we have. And so I just want you to quickly just think of a number. How many species of sharks do you think we have on the whole planet? And then how many species of sharks do you think we have here in our Australian waters? Well, if you guessed over 500 species globally, you would be correct. And there's a few different numbers going around about how many exact species, and we're always discovering new species all the time, but you know, one of the studies actually says 512 species, which is incredible diversity. And then here in our Australian waters, we have 180 species. That is a third of all the species we have in the whole world we find right here in our Australian waters, which I feel really gives us a duty of care to do what we can to protect them. And if we look at Southern Australia more specifically, where most of us are tuning in from, we have about another 70 species of that 180, which are found in our southern waters and nowhere else on the planet. And so an example of some of those species is one, the Port Jackson shark, your top left, which I think is one of the cutest sharks going around. And if you haven't had the pleasure of seeing one of these little cuties, you may have seen their eggs washed up along the beach during your beach walk, which is the top left-hand photo there. And these sharks do lay eggs, and a little baby shark will actually hatch out of that. And sometimes you do find them washed up on the beach, sometimes still with the babies inside them. And then, of course, we've got the goblin shark, which I've never seen one of these. I don't know a lot of people that have, but they more live in some deeper offshore waters, and they have got this long snout. And if you've never Googled a goblin shark feeding, definitely do yourself a favour and Google it. It's one of the most weirdest but fascinating things I've ever seen. And then we've got the school shark, which unfortunately has recently been listed globally as critically endangered. And definitely I know that in the Southern Australian waters, they do often get caught by accident in other fishing operations, such as fishing for gummy shark. And then another one is the broad-nosed seven gill on the bottom right hand. I think these are one of the most weirdest, like dinosaur kind of looking sharks, and they are one of the older species of sharks. And I've only seen one of these once, and it happened to be at Rye Pier on the Mornington Peninsula. Scuba diving with a friend of mine, Jono, and we were looking for the spider crabs at night. And out of nowhere, and this is not a usual thing to really see a lot of sharks swimming under piers, but they'd probably been attracted there because of the crabs. And this little tiny baby seven gill, probably only a half a metre long, was there swimming, and it was so cute. It was amazing. It actually led us to the spider crabs because we were looking for them. It was yeah, one of my top highlights swimming with sharks. So sharks have taught me many important lessons about how much our planet needs sharks, and it's almost like the important role that sharks play in our planet. I almost see that synonymous with the important role that fear can also play in our lives as well, given that many people fear sharks, and the importance of really learning to embrace sharks is almost like really learning to embrace fear as well. And so our oceans need sharks to be healthy. And this is because, and I'm probably might be repeating a lot of things that you already know anyway, but just in case for those who don't, is that many sharks are top apex predators of the food chain, and some are not apex top predators, but some really are important keystone species as well. So wherever they are in the food web, they play an important role and can change everything else around it. And so if we take out sharks from the equation, what can actually happen is entire food webs can be destroyed and totally altered from what they once were. And just an example of this is if we look at a reef system. And you may have heard that the presence of sharks means that our reefs are healthy. And just to put this into a bit more of a visual context, I just want you to imagine that you're going to snorkel on one of your favourite reefs, and you've been there before, and every time it's been healthy, there's been lots of sharks. But this one particular time you go back there and you see that the reef is covered in algae. Well, this is one of the impacts that could happen if we take out all of the sharks from a coral reef system or from a reef system, is that by taking out sharks, who are often at the top of the food chain in those food webs, can actually have cascading effects to all the fish underneath them. And what that can result in is an imbalance in different fish species and the removal of certain fish species which would normally eat and control all of that algae. And all of a sudden, once you're finding there is those fish aren't there to eat the algae, and so what you find is that those algae are out competing that area with coral reefs as well, with corals. And so, okay, so we know that sharks are important for our oceans, right? But of course we think, okay, well, what's in it for us? Why should we all care about sharks? Well, we know that the oceans provide so much benefits to us as well as humans, and our lives are so intricately intertwined with the ocean. From every second breath of air that we're taking, from the little plants in the ocean that are producing the oxygen, to many of us, many people who might be seafood lovers, who eat seafood. But for those of you who don't eat seafood, you know, life from the ocean is in everything, not in everything, but in a lot of things, you know. Seaweeds can be found in ice creams and toothpaste, as an example. And then, of course, we've got, you know, many of us I know who love to explore the underwater world, you know, whether it's snorkeling or scuba diving, and no one wants to go and be amongst a dead reef, right? And then, of course, we've got the mental health benefits of the ocean. It's no surprise that the majority of Australians live within close proximity to the oceans because it makes us happy, and we all want to live as happy a life as we can, and the oceans and the coast definitely play a big part in that. So the other lesson that sharks taught me is that given the role that they play in the oceans and how our interactions with sharks, that we have now become the apex predators of them. So much so that they have actually become one of the most endangered, I should say many species of sharks have become some of the most endangered marine species on the planet after coral. But the third lesson that I've learned is that this decline in shark numbers is largely driven by the seafood that we decide to put on our plates. And so I wanted to break that down more here. So what is the demand for sharks and what is driving a decline? So one is that sharks are targeted for their flesh directly to be consumed, for example, in fish and chip shops. You know, and shark can be labelled as flake and many other names, as it turns out. So, and what we are starting to see is these trends globally is that the demand for flesh is now going up and up, and a lot more than what it used to be. And the issue with this is that flake, as we know it, or what it's labelled as in many fish and chip shop, is supposed to be what we call gummy shark. But what actually happens is that due to labelling laws and a lot of, you know, processes that happen in between catching them in the ocean and then getting them onto our plates, is that we often don't know what species they are. They're mislabeled. Genetic studies have even shown that what is labelled as flake and is supposed to be one particular species has turned out to be endangered hammerhead sharks. So the reality is we actually don't know what we are eating. And Melbourne and Victoria is one of the hearts of eating flake and eating shark. And it's obviously an important part of our Australian culture. And so next we've got fins. So, you know, globally, finning, which is the process of cutting a shark's fins off because they're worth more than what their flesh is. And often their bodies are dumped back in alive overboard. And obviously this is fueled by shark fin soup. Another reason that sharks are targeted is actually for their livers. And because their livers have oil, which is known to be high in vitamin A, and they're actually used in a lot of cosmetic products, lipsticks, sunscreens, face moisturizers, and this is often a product called squalene. And of course, they're used in pharmaceuticals as well, like shark cartilage tablets. But the biggest driver of decline in sharks is actually what we call bycatch or byproducts. And this is the accidental capture of sharks from targeting of other species, for example, tuna, when sharks are often caught by accident and dumped back in overboard because they're not the target species as bycatch, or they're often kept and then sold off commercially as byproducts. So given that this is the largest reason for decline of sharks, it makes the seafood choices that we make so incredibly important, even if we don't eat shark directly. And so the good news is that there is hope. You know, that is a bit of a doom and gloom snapshot, but there is things that we can do in our daily lives to really make an impact and influence what happens out there in the ocean. And one of those ways that we can make a huge difference is by eating sustainable seafood. Seafood that has been caught with minimal impact on our oceans. And one way to do this is by using the Sustainable Seafood Guide, which is called the Good Fish Sustainable Seafood Guide. And what this guide actually does is it looks at a range of different fisheries, mainly in Australia, but some overseas as well, and looks at one is the fish stock or the health of that particular species, like how are the numbers doing, are they healthy? It also looks at the bycatch levels. So what other species have been caught in the process? Is it caught, you know, dolphins, seabirds or sharks or other protected species? And then of course, this can look at the habitat impacts that those fishing methods have been used and how impacting is that having on the marine environment in general. So these are a few different factors of what the Seafood Guide actually looks at. And this is the Seafood Guide here, a bit of a snapshot. So I'm assuming that many of you might already have this Seafood Guide downloaded on your phone. And for those of you who don't, but you are a seafood lover and you eat seafood, I just wanted to invite everyone now to take out your phone and look for it on the App Store, the Good Fish Sustainable Seafood Guide. It makes it really easy for anyone to have an impact. It lists all the species that are sustainable to eat and what's not, and it even has a search function so that next time you're out at a fish market or your local supermarket, you can pull out your phone and you can compare what's on the app with what you are seeing and what the label is from when you're about to buy that as well. So really, I love this because it gives us the power as consumers to really make a big difference, to vote with our wallets, which is so powerful. And some of you might be thinking, okay, well, what are some sustainable species? So some of those are 1, calamari, 2, Australian salmon. You'll notice that it is different to Atlantic salmon. So Australian salmon has been wild caught and doesn't actually have a lot of the pollution impacts that what some aquaculture operations can have. And third is mussels. That's another really good one there. Really great for women too, really high in iron. So that's another really good sustainable option there too. So a little while ago, probably a few years ago now, I made a decision to stop eating shark, or flake as it's commonly labelled in fish and chip shops. And one of the reasons I did this was because much of our seafood, 70% of the seafood that we consume in Australia is actually imported from other countries. And whilst, you know, shark conservation and fisheries management is done like pretty good in Australia compared to other areas of the world, we actually, if we're importing a lot of our own seafood here, we don't have control about what other countries are doing and how they're managing their operations. And so this photo here is a photo from a fish market in Indonesia, in Lombok. And here I personally saw bull sharks, tiger sharks, hammerheads, a whole lot of protected shark species which are not supposed to be caught. And so this is the reality, is that we often can't control what happens in other countries. So I made a decision to stop eating shark or flake. And I just wanted to tell you another quick story involving my dad, actually, because sometimes we think, and I think Dad's on the call. Hi, Dad, if you're joining. Sometimes we think that what is my one, and this is the classic example I see in so many people, is that we think, well, what can my one decision, how can that impact anything? It's a big ocean, right? And what I actually have begun to see is the power of one person to make a decision, and how that can actually create ripple effects to other people. And so when I decided to stop eating flake, I told my dad, and my dad had, you know, is a seafood lover, and he'd always ensured that us kids had grown up eating seafood, fish once a week, and going down to the beach and getting a piece of flake and chips was an important pastime, you know, like it's an important part of our Australian culture, and it's what we did as a family. And so, you know, it probably wasn't the easiest thing for my dad to hear me telling him that. But then I started to tell him the reasons why, and like educating him. And I was utterly shocked one day, because my dad can be, you know, very set in his ways too. And so, but that's why I was so surprised, is that Dad said to me one day, I've decided to stop eating flake as well. And I'd realized, and through Dad telling me, it was through my education that I inspired him to make a change. And sometimes, from what I've seen, is that how this has influenced other people around me too, like, you know, my mum and lots of friends and family, is that by just making one decision of ourselves and communicating that to people, or just people even seeing that you're doing something for a reason, can really inspire them to make a change as well. And so now we have come to our 3 hooks for how we can all give a fish, and most of these I've covered along the way as well. But one is to really give flake a break. You know, maybe some of you have stopped eating shark a long time ago anyway, but you know, for those that maybe still like to eat it, I will admit when I did used to eat it, it was such a beautiful tasting meat. But maybe next time you're at the fish and chip shop, consider a different option. And 2 is to choose to eat sustainable seafood. Visit goodfish.org.au, download the app, and be informed and empowered that your decisions can make an impact, and choose to eat some more sustainable options that are really good for the oceans, the planet, and ultimately ourselves. And 3 is to get inspired and inspire your friends and your family as well, because it really all starts with one decision for ourselves, and this can really create ripple effects, as I have definitely seen throughout a number of different areas of taking action in my own life. So we're coming to an end here now, and I've covered a few different things, from fear to getting empowered in our own everyday lives. But really, some of the key takeaways I really wanted everyone to take away from this talk is that how much sharks can be teachers for humanity, you know, and transform our own fears into freedom. Because the way I really see sharks, and given that so many people fear them, is that if we were to actually embrace fear in our lives, a bit like embracing sharks in our lives, then we can right the balance, our relationship with the natural world. And the second takeaway is that our individual decisions and actions really can have an impact, and doing them locally can really have a global impact. And one of those examples is by making seafood choices, because given that a lot of seafood is imported from other countries as well. So that's it, everyone. That's most of my talk I wanted to deliver to you. I no doubt there was probably some questions I saw coming through as we went along, so very happy to answer them. And thank you all again so much for being here. Actually, sorry, I just wanted to, I forgot this slide at the end. Sorry if I may have just one more minute. It's really my aim is to try and spread the word for sharks, and through some of my stories and what we can all value from sharks too. So if anyone is interested to follow some of my work, I'm on Instagram there, and that's an email there where I'm really trying to rebrand sharks and talk about how I think sharks can be teachers for many of us. And so I've also got my website there, which is howtogiveafish.com. But I also just wanted to give a shout out to the BNPA, who I also have the privilege of working for, the Victorian National Parks Association, where we do a lot of marine and coastal advocacy work. And so that's the website there for BNPA if anyone is interested to find out a little bit more. So thanks, everyone. And Virginia, over to you.
Thanks, Shannon. That was fantastic. Thank you so much for a really fantastic presentation. We did have quite a few interesting questions that came through. Some people wanted to know what camera to use when they're diving and snorkeling. Do you have any advice on the type of camera?
Oh, that's a great question. So if you're after something really easy and simple to use, you can't go past the Olympus Tufts TG, gosh, what's the latest one? Is it TG? Hang on, I've got it right here. The Olympus Tufts TG4s or TG5s, which is this one here. This can actually go down to 10 meters. You don't need a housing or a cover for it. So it's good to go as it is. And it's really simple to use. It does video and camera, but video and photos. But also, if you wanted something a bit more extravagant, there's so many. It's really a personal choice, but I would start with just this one here.
Fantastic, thanks, Shannon. There were questions in the comments asking about the sixth sense of sharks, and Andrew Christie answered that one. Did you want to sort of elaborate further on that, or?
So I can't actually see the answer. I can try and go into the comments, but
Andrew, I've unmuted you. Do you want to talk about the sixth sense of sharks?
Oh yeah, well, basically the sharks have a system called the ampullae of Lorenzini, which are these little gel-filled pits around the snout, and they've got this incredible ability to sense electrical currents in the water. So I think in the chat there, I put in the example of you get a 9-volt battery, you can put the electrodes a kilometre apart, and the shark can actually use it to, they can actually detect that field, as astonishing as that sounds. Some people have suggested they can actually detect the Earth's electrical field and can navigate using that as well. And even if you look at the example of great whites, where they sometimes, you get that footage of them crashing into cages or biting boat propellers and things like that, that's because when you put some of those metals in the water, they set up a galvanic current, and the sharks can actually detect that, and they think it's some sort of prey item and go and crash into it.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing ability. It's one that we find very hard to sort of get our heads around, of course, because we don't have it. But yeah, they certainly do.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, what I would just add to that is that, like, related to us sort of swimming in the water, is that they can even like detect, you know, our sort of the electrical impulses given off by our heartbeats as well. And so that's why when we're swimming in the water, it's really important, particularly if you know that there are sharks around. Like if you're like really sort of, you know, your heartbeat's going and you're feeling the fear and you're really like in that sort of state, which we can all get in, they will be sort of maybe more attracted to that, because they even think it might be more of a struggling prey item or a fish. But the more that we can be relaxed and just breathing, then, you know, actually won't be as attracted, or sharks might even be more inclined to just be a bit more relaxed around you as well.
Beautiful, thank you. And also, sharks go to sleep when they're flipped upside down, is that correct?
Yeah, so I have never personally engaged in putting sharks into that state. The name of it, oh my gosh, I'm having a mental blank what it's actually called.
Tonic mobility.
Yeah, tonic mobility. Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, so some sharks actually do that, and I think it's used definitely a lot. It has been used a lot to probably gain a lot of, attraction from media and things like that, to showing that sharks aren't all out sort of, human-eating creatures. But I know it is used a bit in research as well, particularly people that might be, doing some tagging work on sharks. And yeah, it is apparently, if you do turn them upside down, they actually do go into this sleep-like state where they're, for a moment of time until they get turned back up the other way, they're in this state of like, just, I don't even know what you compare it to. Maybe I should leave that one.
That's really amazing, isn't it? That's amazing. Just the issue regarding flake and the labelling, and whether that should be lobbied to change, or how we can do that better, because if we lump all the shark varieties together and just call them flake, do we need to re-educate the fish and chip shops and markets and so on? Can that be done a lot better?
Yeah, I would say yes. Great question, and definitely can be done a lot better. Maybe you also have thoughts on this too, Andrew, but I think that there is a lot of, it can be approached from a lot of different angles. So, some fishing, when, there are fishing operations, not all, I guess, sharks that are caught, depending on if sharks are the target species or they're not all sharks are actually recorded as what species they are. Sometimes they just get labelled as, oh yeah, they're a shark. And so, but so that's like from one angle, which, I really think that they should be recorded to species level in all operations. But then it also goes back to, the fish and chip shops directly, and labelling them. I know a lot of places have labelled them certain things because it attracts more people to buy them. And there are labelling laws which need to be strengthened as well. And I think there's a lot of work to do in this area. It is about, I think that what we can all do is, when we are in a fish and chip shop or buying it, you can even just start to ask a lot of questions.
Yeah.
What species is this? And if they can't tell you what species it is and where it's come from, like where it was caught, then definitely don't buy it. And the more that us as consumers can be asking those questions of the shops, and that can actually then start to put on the pressure from the ground roots level, and create that change back up.
Definitely. And it's very impressive when they do have an idea, when they can talk about it authoritatively. Yeah. Thanks, Shannon. Somebody was asking if we're recording this. We are, and we're going to pop it onto our YouTube channel or some other way. Are you prepared to have your slides made available too, Shannon? If we... Yeah, okay, fantastic. So we'd love to thank you. We'll just finish the questions there, if that's okay. It's a fantastic talk, and all the interesting facts about sharks, and the Sustainable Seafood Guide and our choices is just so important. So fantastic, we can all tap into that. I'd like to thank all the participants who came along today and gave a fish. We're going to follow up the talk with an email with some more details, and also a very brief survey to get your feedback on how we could have done things better. Our next National Science Week talk is about Port Phillip's endangered Burinan dolphins by Dr. Kate Robb next week. She's from the Marine Mammal Foundation, so that's on Sunday at 11 a.m. And you can check that on our website. Our website was in the link of my email to you. And finally, we'd like to thank MESAC sponsors, so Coast Care, Bendigo Bank by Morris, and the VMPA. So thank you very much, everybody, and Shannon, fantastic. And enjoy your Sunday, everyone.
Thank you, Virginia. Can I just quickly say, I just noticed that some people were commenting about my contact details.
Yes, yes.
So I just popped them in the chat there, but also, yeah, the email that will be sent out will have them. So hopefully you definitely registered so that you will receive that email.
Lovely. And Mick, you've sent something from SBS, a link from SBS, which would be very interesting for people.
That was a brilliant show as well.
So if everyone wants to click on that link and have a look at that. Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone.
So much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon. Bye. Bye.
Yeah, well done.
Yeah.
Bye.